Do we have Janae on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Janae, maybe you can walk us through a few housekeeping items and then we'll get started if you don't mind.
All right. Well, good evening and welcome to the Minnesota SCORE Chapter Workshop. Got my CARES Act loan, now what? I'm Janae Cordy and I'm the workshop coordinator. Before we start the workshop, I would like to explain a few aspects of the presentation. First, the workshop is being recorded and the video will be on the SCORE website, minnesota.score.org, in a few days. If you would like to revisit any portion of the workshop, please visit our website in a few days to view the video. If you would like to submit a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A icon on your screen so that we can organize and respond to as many questions as possible. Please include the slide number that corresponds to each of your questions. Registrants may pose more than one question, but please use separate Q&A requests for each of them. The first portion of this presentation will go over the latest updates on the CARES Act program. You should have received the PDF of the PPP loan forgiveness application in the emails we sent today. Please have those printed PDFs out in front of you so that you can follow along with the webinar. The second portion of the webinar will then go over how you can digitally transform marketing, sales, and customer experiences. We will begin the Q&A following the presentation. Now that we have the workshop logistics out of the way, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Tom Garov. Tom retired in 2013 after a 40-year career with General Motors Corporation. Starting as a college co-op student, Tom held management positions in auto assembly and executive positions in dealer field management, GMAC finance, customer relations, and contact center management. Tom completed his career at GM with a 6-year assignment in Shanghai. Tom, I'm now handing the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Janae. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. First of all, let me apologize. We're always hopeful that we can hold these workshops / webinars on a face-to-face basis, but under the current circumstances, I'm sure everybody understands why we have to move to this Zoom format. In the future, as conditions permit, we anticipate that we will be once again having face-to-face workshops at Manatee Technical College. It's our understanding we may be able to start those as early as the first week of July. Keep an eye on the website to see updates on that issue. In the meantime, we will be continuing additional webinars / these workshops and try our best to make them as interactive as possible by at least providing a very lengthy question and answer period at the end. And we promise that we will stay here as long as we need to address each and every one of your questions as best as possible. That being out of the way, let me first start out with a little bit of good news that Barry will touch on briefly. As you know, the title of this is that now that you have your CARES Act loan, now what? The good news is your federal government is working very hard. There is still money available under the current loan programs that we're going to talk about this evening and talk about the forgiveness, PPP specifically. There's as much as $100 billion that is still available, and your federal government is working hard to try to make the loan programs a little more attractive than what they may have been in the past. Barry will be touching on this. There's some consideration that may be passed as early as next week or this week that may adjust some of the things we're going to talk about, so stay tuned in the news. But the good news is there's still money available, and they're working hard to try to make these loans as convenient and meeting the goal of keeping you and your fellow workers in business. So a lot of good news on that front. That being said, let me start out by telling you a little bit more about SCORE. As you know, we're a nonprofit organization that's independent resource partner of the Small Business Administration. And SCORE provides America's small businesses with free confidential business mentoring. And there's roughly 300 chapters with as many as 11,000 volunteers throughout the United States. serving roughly 1,500 communities. And since its founding in 1964, they've served over 10 million clients. And once again, it's a SCORE. The SCORE, an acronym, stands for Service Corps Retired Executives, was the original title. As you notice, all of us are retired managers and executives of sort. So it's still the same makeup, but the organization is simply referred to as SCORE. Next slide. And as you can see, what we do we are available for the life of your business. We start with the research and plan. We can start with the research and planning phases if you're just starting to get into business. Work with you through pre-startup, startup phases to the opening of your business. We can work with you through the growth phases of your business, even to the point that you're looking to exit your business, and can mentor you through ideas on how to sell your business for a fair price that gets you to the financial objectives that you're looking for as a result of your hard work. So we're available through the entire process, and you can get a SCORE mentor if you don't already have one by going to minnesota.score.org. As Janae mentioned earlier, that's also the website where you can view the recorded webinars. Next slide. This is just, I'm not going to go through this. This is a brief picture of the people that will be speaking this evening. There's myself first. Nabil will be coming on talking about digitizing and ideas in crisis management, how to convert your business in what may be a new norm in a digital world, how to best capitalize on all of the resources that are available to get your business out into the marketplace. And Barry will be talking to us momentarily about the loan programs and the CARES Act. Next slide. Just briefly, as we go through this material, it's important that you understand, as you know, we're a volunteer organization, and the programs are particularly on this particular topic, the details of these programs are changing literally almost on a daily basis. So we encourage you to make sure that you are keeping in touch with also your other resources, which may be your own accountants, lawyers, and our financial advisors, which we are not. We do not claim to be your financial accountants, lawyers, or financial advisors. We're simply here to mentor on a volunteer basis. And as a result, we always put this disclaimer up just so that you're clearly aware.
I'm
sorry, I had to unmute myself. Somehow or another, I accidentally muted it. Can you hear me now?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Next slide. Okay, so today we're talking about, got my CARES Act loan, now what? Just briefly, I just want to remind everybody, the first two webinars that are available on our SCORE website provide you with the details on how you would have gone about applying for your CARES Act loan and or other financial avenues that you may have taken, whether it be state-funded programs and or unemployment. We cover many, many topics on those two webinars. This one is a continued follow-up and is a bit of a third in the series that talks about the fact that you participated and you understand, and probably by now you've gotten your CARES Act loan, and what are the next steps that you want to think about. And as you can see, we're going to talk about the status of the PPP program, the EIDL loan program, which are all part of the CARES Act. And more importantly, we're going to talk about the PPP loan forgiveness rules, because as we mentioned in the first two webinars, it's very important that you're documenting the use of those funds through separate accounts, how you disperse those funds, and the documentation under the rules and what you're going to need to make sure that those loans are forgiven. We're going to talk about tax credit for furloughed workers. We're going to talk about new details regarding Florida unemployment claims. There's some frustration out there in the marketplace. Barry will be touching on those topics above. I'll be coming back talking about the Main Street lending program, which is due to roll out very shortly. And then Nabil's going to come back and probably feed us with some really good meat about how to digitally transform your marketing, sales, and your customer experiences to make sure that you're taking advantage of and getting the news out about your business being reopened and ready to do business, of which Nabil will be touching on digitizing your marketing mix, the 4 Ps of marketing, leveraging all the digital channels, social media, email, and turning your outside sales into an inside sales force, and creating customer intimacy in an environment of social distancing. All of these topics we feel are probably very key to you opening up and starting your business again. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Barry. And as I mentioned, Barry's going to touch on these topics about the CARES Act, PPP, EIDL loans, a few other tax credit topics, and then we'll be turning it over to Nabil a little bit later. So Barry, you're up.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome everybody. I appreciate your time today. I'm going to be talking about the first 2 issues there, the PPP loan status, and I'll be spending quite a bit of time talking about the loan forgiveness application. After that, Tom's going to follow up on the EIDL stuff, tax credits, and the unemployment issues. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So as Tom mentioned, based on what we're hearing, there's about $100 billion left that has not been loaned out for the PPP program. But the pace of the loans has dropped dramatically. A lot of people believe that the reason it's dropped is that people are unsure about what the terms of the loans are. As a matter of fact, some of the larger companies returned some of the money that they had from the PPP loans. But as we think about the people who are listening to the webinar and whether you have your loan or not, for those of you that don't, there is money still available. Next slide, please. This slide just shows that historically there was, in the first round of PPP loans, the average loan was over $200,000, and now it's down to an average loan of $73,000. And that's mostly having to do with the fact that the very big companies stopped getting these loans. Next slide, please. Now we want to talk about 2 safe harbors that are relatively new. The first one has to do with certifying why you applied for the loan in the first place. One of the safe harbors basically says that if you apply for the loan, the government will presume that you did it in good faith. And that means that it takes one of the obstacles and burdens off of you. That's why it's called a safe harbor. Next one. The second safe harbor has to do with how you calculate FTEs. And when we get into the actual worksheets in just a few minutes, you will see that it's a complex, complicated process. But what the safe harbors have done basically is that they've said if you furloughed employees or fired them between the beginning of February and the end of April, and then you rehire an equal number back, not the same people, but if you go out and you try to hire the same number that were fired or furloughed, then you'll still maintain your eligibility for forgiveness. That is going to turn out to be a big deal. Okay, next slide, please. All right, we're going to start talking about the forgiveness application, and I believe, Janae, you have a survey. So the survey basically says, what resources do you plan to use for completing the loan forgiveness application? We have a lot of people who try to do it themselves. A lot of people depend on outside organizations. So please read the choices for how you're going to, who you're going to use to help you. The second part, question number 2, is whether or not you would have interest in a meeting in the future after you've reviewed some of the resources, which will show you whether or not you'd like to have a little bit more detail. So if you're not able to answer this question now, then save it for later. But what we're going to want to know is, do you think that you might have interest in an interactive Zoom meeting where we would cover some of these items in detail? Yes, no, or not sure. I'll wait for that survey to be done, and then we'll go on. Janae, when you have enough responses, just show them on the screen.
Okay, we're at 34 of 61, so maybe give a few more seconds.
Sure.
Barry, we have one member that's saying they're using several resources, and that's great. The more the better. The more eyes look at it, the better. So that person's probably in pretty good shape.
All right, I'm gonna close it now.
Okay, great. So about a third are saying, I'm going to try to do this myself. Another third aren't sure, and everybody else is split between the two. And to the second question, there seems to be a reasonable amount of interest in a Zoom session. Well, let's hold that, because we're going to provide you some information in the next few minutes, and we can talk about the possible Zoom meeting later. So if we can go on to the next slide. So as Tom was saying, we first saw the loan forgiveness application in the middle of May, about the 15th. But then this past Friday, the SBA issued even more regulations and updates to the guidance. So what I've been trying to do between the 15th and today is to compile all this and put it together. As Janae said, for those of you who have the application PDF out in front of you, it would be helpful. For those of you that have not yet seen the application, the link at the bottom of the slide will take you there. Next, please. So we consider that this application for forgiveness is really only a draft. The chances look good that Congress may modify some of the loan forgiveness terms. This particular version of the application is 11 pages long, and some people believe the application should be renamed. Those people believe it should be renamed the Accountants and Attorneys Full-Time Employment Act. We'll see in a minute if you agree. The form can be intimidating, and for many borrowers, it might be difficult to maneuver without some help from professionals. Personally, I have to admit to being a bit apprehensive when I was asked to present the information about the application. So I did what a number of other people would do. I turned to my accountant. Next slide. So before we talk about what my accountant said, going back to what Tom was saying earlier, there's a lot of things in the news, and this slide particularly has some of the things that are being said about either elongating the amount of time that you need to spend the money. Right now it's 56 days, but there are people talking in Congress about making it 12 weeks, 24 weeks, even longer. That's number one. And the second thing has to do about how the money is spent. As you know, you couldn't, under the original rule, you couldn't spend more than 75% on salary, but there are other pieces of legislation now that might allow borrowers to spend even more. Next, please. So going back to what I asked my accountant, I said, I wanted his opinion about how he thinks owners of small business will understand this application. And what he told me was that the form is riddled with vague definitions and concepts, and he doesn't think that many people will fill it out correctly. He said he thought that if 10 people filled it out, they would have 10 different answers. I hope that's not true. Next, please. So with that in mind, I had to figure out a way to present the forgiveness application in a way that would be understandable. So what I tried to do was take the same approach I used when I first visited the Magic Kingdom. So many things to see, so many places to visit, what should I do? I decided the best way to help explain the application is to take you on a tour of the application and explain each of the major sections one by one. Next, please. So my goals for the presentation are pretty straightforward. First, provide resources so that you can learn how to complete the application. Secondly, give you an overview of the key sections. Thirdly, summarize what I think may be the most important aspects. And lastly, talk about the need that you may have to talk with your lenders, accountants, and lawyers. Next, please. So the application might be a puzzle, and we try to provide you with some resources so you can find instructions on how to complete the application. Next, please. So goal number one is probably, in my mind, the most important. It's to provide you with resources so that you can learn how to complete the application correctly. Next, please. The resources we provide go into great detail on how the borrowers can complete the application. While SCORE believes these resources will be very helpful, we cannot be responsible for the accuracy of the information. In addition to the resources, again, we encourage you to talk to your lender and other professionals. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take a second here and say to all of you on the call, this slide is, in my mind, the most important because each of these links will take you to a place that will either be a news article that will explain step by step on how to complete the application, but even more importantly, the video links at the bottom of the slide will take you to videos given by CPAs and other organizations that will show you exactly how to fill out the application. So while I'm going to give you a high-level overview, if I were one who had to fill out the application, the first thing I would do would be to go to these articles and the videos. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some of the highlights of the most recent regulation changes. One of the things they did was they give the borrowers more flexibility in how they define the 8-week period. It means that you can choose now between two different payroll periods. You can choose from when you receive the money, or you can choose what they call from an alternative period that begins on the first pay period for your payroll. So when you go through the application, please take time and read the difference between those two periods. Borrowers can also choose when they spent the money. Before it was kind of straightforward, but now it says that you can choose the period of time can be when you received the money or when you spent the money. And those are things that are very, very careful to be considered. And lastly, there are a couple of worksheets which we'll explain in a moment that will help you define the level of reduced loan forgiveness for non-compliance. And what that means is that there's additional instruction that's available so that you can go through a form and have a higher degree of confidence that you won't have a reduced forgiveness. And we'll go through that in a minute. Next slide, please. So let's start by what are the sections of the application. Let's go next, please. So the application is basically divided into 4 components. The first component is something called a calculation form. The second is something called a Schedule A. The third section is called a Schedule A worksheet, not to be confused with Schedule A. And the fourth section is a section to allow people to provide their demographic information if they want to. Most importantly, that you have to submit the loan forgiveness calculation form and Schedule 1 with your documentation. Next, please. So because we have different kinds of clients, we have clients that are smaller, mid-sized firms that have employees, but we also have a number of clients who are self-employed. So I want to start with the people who are self-employed businesses. If you're self-employed and you have no W-2 employees, you may have an easier time filling out the application. For those kind of borrowers, it may be that all the information you need is limited to the income information from your 1040 Schedule C when you originally applied for the loan. One of the very best sources of information about loan forgiveness for self-employed comes from an organization called NAV, and their link to the article that they wrote about self-employed loan forgiveness is at the bottom of the slide. I encourage you that are self-employed to look at that link. Next slide. So the second goal is to provide an overview of the sections. And as Janae said, if you have a copy of the application handy, let's go through it with your application in front of you. Next, please. So page 1. Page 1 is general instructions that cover each and every element of the application. Obviously, you want to read this first to get a general understanding, but if you're not an accountant or a tax lawyer, we recommend that you talk to your lender or a professional to review each of the instructions so that you understand them. Interestingly, in our poll earlier, about 1/3 of the people thought that they could do this themselves. I hope you're right, but I want to just offer to you that talking to your lender or your accountant first after you read the instructions will be very helpful. Next, please. Page 2 of the application has a total of 11 instructions for how you do forgiveness costs. This slide shows the first 5. Next slide, please. This slide shows the next 6. I'm not going to read these one by one. I'm going to let you read it. You'll find that the documentation that they refer to is going to be really important to have. From everything I've read, and hopefully what you will have read as well, if you don't have all the necessary documentation, the chances of your loan being entirely forgiven will drop dramatically. Be prepared to take the time to review these instructions. They're complicated. If you find that the documentation that you have now is not complete, you'll need to pull it together before you submit the application. Next, please. Page 3 of the application is one of the forms that you submit to your lender. It's called the calculation form, and it has a lot of details. Let's look at the information you'll need for this form. Next slide, please. So what I did was here is I created this table. I took each one of the elements of detail from the calculation form and I put it here. Now, a lot of this information came from your original PPP loan application, but, and I want to stress this, some of this information is fairly complicated. The information required for number one, the amount of the payroll, number two, the payroll period, number three, the number of employees, and number four, the requested forgiveness amount will require your detailed attention. Next, please. Now, truth and nothing but the truth. I put this slide here because that's what page 4 is. Page 4 is a set of certifications and declarations that you are providing the information in an honest, accurate, and truthful way. Next slide, please. Here's what those representations and certifications say. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I would like to point out the one I've highlighted. And it's not my intention to alarm anyone, but I do want to point out how serious the SBA is about submitting an accurate and truthful application. When you're working on the application, I suggest you review this page with your accountant or your lawyer long before you think about submitting the application. Next slide, please. Now, page 5 is more instructions for Schedule A. Again, not Schedule A worksheet, but Schedule A. You get a lot of the information for Schedule A from the original application. You're also going to take information from the Schedule A worksheet, which I'll show you in a minute, and transfer it to the Schedule A. I know I sound like a tax lawyer. I guarantee you I'm not. But it's important that as you think about the information, you know what the components are to these different pages. The instructions include information about expenses, number of employees at different times, and importantly, the calculation of FTEs. In my view, page 5 will take a long time to figure out. Next, please. Page 6 is Schedule A. And again, if you have it in front of you, you can see what it is. This is one of the worksheets that, along with the calculation form, will be submitted to your lender. Like all the other forms, it must be accurate. To complete this form, you'll need to refer again to the original loan application, as well as information you'll complete on the Schedule A worksheet. So to step back for just a moment, there's a Schedule A and then there's a Schedule A worksheet. Okay, next slide, please. So let's take a pause for a moment and acknowledge that applying for this loan forgiveness is going to be hard work. Like in some of the seminars we've had in the past, we've stressed the importance of keeping accurate documentation for how you use your loan expenses for payroll, for other non-payroll items, and you need to keep detailed records for the staffing as well as changes in staffing. Now, this is something that's not on the slide, but I do want to mention it. According to the SBA, all the documentation that you use to request loan forgiveness, you are going to have to keep for 6 years. 6 years. Okay. With that in mind, let's move on to instructions for the Schedule A worksheet. Next slide, please. Oh, here we are. Thanks. There are 2 pages, 7 and 8. The directions, I found them to be fairly helpful. There's a step process that you have to go through, 3 steps to calculate your payroll deductions. And there's other information about the FTE reduction safe harbor. The safe harbor is important. It protects you, but it's important that you understand what it says and what it means. Next slide, please. Page 9 is the infamous Schedule A worksheet. It will require you to list each employee, their compensation, and the amount of reduced salaries. The form also includes 2 tables and will require you to have detailed employee records and payroll information in order to complete it. And as an aside, I've sat through a couple of webinars from accounting firms and law firms who've talked about this particular worksheet. And the messages come through loud and clear. For the Schedule A worksheet, for those of you that have a payroll service or you use software for your payroll, it's going to be really important that you use that information when you're completing the Schedule A worksheet. The section about the safe harbor is a 5-step process so that you can understand exactly how it's going to work for you. Please read that part carefully as well. Okay, next. So when we get to page 10 of the application, it's nothing more than an inventory of all the documentation you're going to need. So if it were me, after I read page 1 of the application with general instructions, I would go immediately to page 10. I would make sure that I printed it out, I have it as a checklist, and I make sure that I have all that information, whether it's the payroll expenses, FTE count, non-payroll, whatever. But the key again is that whatever you're going to have to support the forgiveness application, you're going to have to keep for 10 years. Okay, next slide, please. So we're at the end of the application. There's a form with some tables that if you want to provide demographic information on yourself, you can. It may allow the SBA to make a better statistical analysis. I'm not sure. Okay, next. So here's a slide where I'm going to take a minute or two to walk through it, and it may engender questions later in the Q&A. So you're faced with the application, you're trying to do it yourself, or you're working with your accountant or your professional. So step 1, I think, is use those resources that we provided on that earlier slide. Go to those links. Take time to watch the videos and listen and make notes about how to complete the application. You may even go to more than one video. That's what I did, and I found it very helpful. Secondly, I would use that page 10 that I mentioned earlier, and I'd use it as a checklist to collect your documentation. Do I have everything that I need? I do? Great. If I don't, whoops, what do I need to do to get the documentation I need? Then once you have everything in place, you can begin to enter the data onto the application. You can complete a preliminary version, work with your accountant or your lender as well to test to see if the application looks complete, at least as a preliminary version. Now, the last bullet I think is important to stress. You're going to have to decide when you want to submit your forgiveness application. The applications are not due until the end of October. That's 5 months from now. But what we do know is, or what we hope, is there are going to be changes to the loan forgiveness rules. And some of those changes should make, we hope, make forgiveness more easy to do and maybe make it a higher probability that the loan that you receive will be entirely forgiven. But there's no rush to complete the application and submit it. Next slide, please. So in closing, I want to talk about what to expect when you do submit your application. Either you can submit it now or before October 31st, but again, our suggestion is to wait a while to see what the rules change. But once you submit the application, the lender has 60 days to either accept your forgiveness or reject it, either in whole or in part. What the lender then does is they send the application to the SBA with the lender's recommendation. The lender then has 30 more days to agree or disagree with the recommendation from the lender. When the SBA agrees what the lender said, whether it's all or in part, it will notify the borrower and the lender. So that's a total of 90 days from the time you submit the application. Now, here's one of the unknowns. If your application is rejected, either in whole or in part, you can challenge the decision. We have not seen the information about how to do that. All we have been told by the SBA is they expect to issue those rules soon. Next. So, in closing, talk to your lender. Submit the application to the lender that is servicing your loan. And what do I mean by that? Well, the highlighted bullet says that the lenders can sell the loan paper to other lenders, sort of what they did in the mortgage crisis in 07 and 08. So we don't know yet, and you don't know yet, whether you're the bank or the lender that you originally went to for the loan will actually be the lender that you'll submit your forgiveness loan to. So it's important now to talk to your lender to make sure that they are still your servicing lender. And lastly, as you move forward, talking and communicating with your lender is an important element for moving forward. Now with that, I think I'm going to turn this over to Tom to talk about some of the EIDL issues. Tom?
Great, thanks, Barry. I've been monitoring a few of the questions just as a reminder to everybody. All the slides that you're seeing, as well as this recorded webinar, will be available on the minnesota.score.org website that you see there on the bottom of the screen. Janae will be posting it sometime tomorrow. And it's, as we mentioned, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to see the slides along with all of the presentation comments from the presenters. In addition to that, you should have received the PPP slides in your, the PowerPoint slides in your invitation that we sent to you via email. And you should have copies of those also. So there's plenty of information out there that you should be able to review this material. Okay, so let's move on and talk about the EIDL loan program, which some of you have, I'm seeing in the Q&A, have participated in. On April 16th, the SBA actually suspended accepting the EIDL loans on its portal. All applicants that have already submitted their application will still have their applications processed on a first come, first served basis. And even though April 16th is over a month ago, apparently there's still some that have not yet been processed. On April 24th, the SBA reported it had provided nearly $8 billion in EIDL loans to 38,000, roughly 39,000 applicants with an average loan size of $204,000. And at that rate, they realized that they would fund no more than 1.7 million applications, or about a third of the funding requests that they had. So they realized on April 24th that they were in a bit of a pickle because they had many more applications than they had anticipated. Therefore, they made a decision on May 4th that the applications would be reopened for, apparently in their discussions with U.S. agricultural businesses only, that were impacted by COVID-19. And then on May 14th, they abruptly dropped the EIDL limit from $2 million down to $150,000. So that being said, you can see that there's been some jockeying around on the part of Congress and the administrators of the EIDL program to try to accommodate many more people than when they had originally started the program. Next slide. That being said, if you're on this webinar and you have submitted an application for an EIDL loan, you should know that they are right now, the SBA has on May 21st, you should have an EIDL loan number. And right now they're processing applications starting with number 33. That being said, if you're number 34, 35, 36, or some number greater than 33, you're still in the queue yet to be processed. Hopefully we don't have anybody in that bucket as we proceed here. In the meantime, if you care to call the Small Business Administration, there's an 800 number. In addition to that, there's a website at the Disaster Customer Service Center you can see on the bottom of the screen. So in terms of the EIDL loan program, if you want to have any updates, that's the information that we have at this point in time. Next slide. One other thing before I move on, EIDL loans and their compatibility with the PPP program and other programs that we're going to talk about here just briefly. The compatibility and the rules on which ones of those you can participate in a multiple fashion. All of those rules are covered on the earlier two webinars, so I'd encourage you to take a look at those in the event that you wanted to participate in more than one of the programs, or you already were and you were thinking about making further application for another PPP loan. As we mentioned earlier, there's still funding available. Next slide. So we're going to talk about tax credits for furloughed workers. Another program that is available that is being administered through the IRS, available for small businesses, is that companies can now claim a tax credit worth up to $5,000 for each employee who isn't being paid and isn't working, but is still receiving employer-provided health benefits. This is in our previous webinars, we talked about this program, but they've made some modifications to this program since we had those webinars. And they have now clearly stated that if you are an employer and you have laid off employees, and perhaps you are still providing the health benefits for those employees, but you may not be providing PPP and or any type of payroll support for those employees, you can apply for a tax credit up to $5,000 per each employee. If you happen to fall into that scenario. You can get more details on that on the linked website that you see on the bottom, but it's another benefit for those of you that may not have been participating in some of the other programs, whether it be PPP or EIDL. Next slide. I'm going to touch briefly on the Florida unemployment program for those of you that have employees that may be a little frustrated with collecting unemployment. The Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, they've waived the job search requirement in Florida until the end of May. This is a bit of a good news type of a piece of information, because individuals going through the unemployment process in the state, previous to that date, they had to prove that they were actively seeking employment. In this particular case, they've now waived that, and they simply need to have proof that they are unemployed, and that's beginning May 10th. Governor DeSantis has directed the DEO to continue waiving that work search, work registration requirement all the way through May 30th. So that's kind of good news. The issue one, and I'm going to talk about it in just a minute, is their ability to get on the website to get their application in. For those individuals that need to stop their claims, and because they have been called back to work, you must notify the DEO, and you can do that. There's a step-by-step process, and by clicking on the website below, they'll be able to you'll be able to guide your employees how to do that. Next slide. On May 12th, the DEO is limiting the number of users that were allowed to connect to the website at one time. As we mentioned in previous webinars, unfortunately, the DEO did not make their digital pipes big enough to accept all of the claims. So they had a mad rush for people trying to get unemployment benefits. They overloaded the system, and as a result, many people could not log in and connect. They feel that they've resolved some of those issues. So if you have employees that were lucky enough to have received their benefits and they need to stop their benefits, as I mentioned earlier, they can do that now with an 800 number call, or they can still do it through the website if they happen to be able to get logged in. So we anticipate, based on the information that we have, that the unemployment issues and their ability to get into the websites and or call the 800 number has somewhat been resolved, but you may find that you're going to have some employees mentioning that or complaining to you about it because it is indeed a challenge. Next slide. Next topic is the Main Street Lending Program. As I mentioned early in the presentation, I think our federal government has been doing a relatively good job trying to react, you know, in this very unusual situation with this high unemployment. How do we support small businesses, medium-sized businesses, as well as large-sized businesses? And without getting into all the politics of whether we should be bailing out the airlines or we should be bailing out big corporations and not taking care of this part of the economy, whatever, I do believe that the programs, as we've described them, whether it be the PPP and the EIDL program or some of the specific programs that the federal government has put together for airlines and or large corporations, there is now this program, which is yet to be announced, is not yet to be rolled out, but has been in the news for all the way back, as far back as April, where they were talking about the Main Street Lending Program. However, all of the details have been massaged and continue to be adjusted prior to the rollout. The good news is there's up to $600 billion that are going to be available to mostly mid-sized businesses, probably not so many people that are on our call being SBA members, but this program is available to small businesses, as you will see in the guidelines as you walk through here. You don't have to, you can be a sole proprietor, you can be a self-employed with less than 500 employees. However, you have to have up to, you know, a substantial revenue. So you'd be a very large sole proprietor, self-employed business if you qualified for this program. But it operates more like a traditional loan. They anticipate that this will be rolled out before the 1st of next month. So we're talking about somewhere in the next few days, they'll be announcing this Main Street Lending Program. As I mentioned, it operates like a traditional loan. It's going to be run through certain approved lenders. And there's, as you can see, there were previously in our previous webinars, we talked about some of these details. They made adjustments that are highlighted on my slide here. You can see that there's now 3 types of loans that will be into this program. The loan facility that's going to be funding it is the Federal Bank of Boston. The rates vary from 2.5% to 4%. It's a 4-year loan versus a 2-year loan, which is what the PPP would, those loans in the PPP that are not forgiven turn into 2-year loans. these particular loans turn into a 4-year loan, and the smallest amount is $1 million, and there's 1% initiation fee. So you can see it's mostly for larger, medium-sized businesses. So I think the point here is that the thing to understand is that I think the government is working hard to try to accommodate small businesses, the individuals, which are mostly that we are servicing in SCORE, medium-sized businesses, as well as the large corporations. This is for mostly aimed at the medium-sized guys. Next slide. Okay, now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Nabil. As we mentioned, before I turn the meeting over to Nabil, keep in mind we're going to have a Q&A session as long as you would like at the end of this. We've covered a lot of material about the CARES Act and the loan programs. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Janae will be assisting us in proctoring through those questions at the end of the meeting. But for now, we're going to turn the meeting over to Bill, who's going to talk about...
Tom, excuse me. Tom?
Yes.
Excuse me, I apologize. I think Janae has another survey she needs to do before Nabil.
Okay, I apologize.
So...
There we go.
Did you take out a loan? I asked a PPP loan? Yes, no? Have you had a chance yet to review the application form? And I don't think anybody has, but we wanted to find out, have you submitted your application for forgiveness yet? Those are the 3 questions.
We're at 39 responses out of 52. So I'll give a few more seconds.
Thank you.
All right, I will close the polling now.
So 80%, a little less than half have actually looked at the application. That's good. And no one has filled it out, thankfully. Okay, thank you, everybody. With that, Nabil, I'm going to turn the program back over to you.
You're up, Nabil.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Janae. Good afternoon, everybody. Question to ask ourselves these days are the CARES Act relief funds that we're seeing coming through the federal government, are they enough to keep us and sustain us going through this economic crisis? And VM just recently did a small business survey where they surveyed people to find out if indeed they are going to be in a good shape. And unfortunately, there is some lack of optimism, if you wish, among small businesses in their abilities to continue to operate their businesses in the fashion that they were in previous months and previous years, as you could see here with the numbers that came back from that survey. However, there is a silver lining here. Some businesses are finding that they're getting more revenues nowadays. 30% of them are optimistic. And what's interesting also is that a quarter of these businesses are looking into investing in new technologies. So if you are a non-essential business, you cannot remain idle and depend on the government financially until this crisis is over. What you have to do is be agile and repurpose, adapt, pivot, or optimize your business to let you get through this period. You could use the CARES Act relief funds and the time that it just bought you, particularly the PPP funds, they bought you about 8 to 10 weeks time. Use that to transform your business. so you could survive the entire economic crisis, no matter how long it's going to last. And we're going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about digital transformation, here specifically how to transform your small business in the area of marketing, sales, and customer experiences. Many of our SCORE clients are familiar with this page. This is the business model canvas. We give workshops and we will likely give webinars right now during this crisis about the business model canvas. It is basically a business plan on one page. Your company functions are divided down into 9 blocks, 9 boxes. The business model canvas provides questions surrounding each of those boxes or functions. If you answer all these questions, you have a business plan, a concise business plan about your entire operation. Here, what we're going to do is discuss 4 boxes, specifically in the areas of marketing, sales, and customer relationships, where we will talk about the value propositions that you offer. And here we'll talk about the marketing mix, the 4 P's of marketing. The 2 that are involved in the value proposition are number 1, product, number 2, price. And then the last 2 P's of the marketing mix are place and promotion, which fall under the channels box. Then we will talk about your sales and customer experiences, how you digitalize that. And then lastly, we will look at how to digitalize your target segments. So with that, we will be able to cover pretty much all the marketing, sales, and customer relationship functions. Now, these target markets that you're going after, those segments, they actually consume your product with the different senses that us humans have. All these senses play very important roles in how you could digitize your product. What's important to note here is that the 2 senses that currently today we have a full capability of digitizing are the sight and the hearing senses. So with sight, the optical wavelength that come into our eyes, we could convert that with the use of a camera, for instance, into an electrical signal. We could digitize that signal into bits and bytes, store it, and redisplay it through monitors. Same thing with audio waves. We could do pretty much the same thing with audio waves. So as far as sight and hearing senses are concerned, if your clients are consuming your products through these senses, you're in a very good place to be able to digitize your product and serve it through cyberspace or online. The other 3 senses are a little more complicated. Actually, they're a lot more complicated, but there's a lot of research that's taking place right now in order to help us to digitize these senses. What's important to note here is that many of the products that are sold utilize most of these senses. So let's get started with the product. That's the first P in the marketing mix. That's the good or service that your company sells. We divided it down here into 2 different parts. One, the products that are fully digitally capable. So that's digital products and services such as audio, music, video, art, books, information, software, finance, insurance, education. All these products and services mainly involve the sight and the hearing senses, and they could be fully digitized. However, there are other products that are physical products or services, such as healthcare, travel, hospitality, construction, retail, hardware, food, apparels, household. These kind of products are heavily dependent on the other senses, such as taste, smell, and touch senses, which are hard to digitalize. And in these cases, what are you supposed to do if you want to digitally transform your products and your company? Well, the way you digitalize these is pretty straightforward, actually. What you need to do is to separate the audio-visual components and the informational components about your products from the other senses. So for instance, if you could capture images, capture the sounds, capture videos, and then create descriptions, specs, certificates, features, benefits about your product, create frequently asked questions with their answers, obviously, the success stories, testimonials, reviews, case studies. If you could create all that content and digitize it and store it online, that will give the ability for your target markets to consume at least the audiovisual and informational part about your products online. Now, how would you deal with the other senses? Well, your target market will have at this point to use their imagination. So through your description and the specs and the certifications, you could kind of give them an idea of what to expect in terms of what your product's going to feel like, what it's going to smell like, what's going to taste like. That's typically what you have to do if you're selling a tangible product, is provide a lot of that information online. And if you are an Amazon client, for instance, they do a very good job at providing all that information on their platform. So you go to purchase a product from Amazon, a tangible product, you will see a lot of that information. You'll see pictures, you will read reviews, you will see the specs, you may see additional features and benefits about this product. So they get you to the point as close as possible to understand what that product is online without actually having that product before you get to push that buy button. And then once you purchase it, they'll ship it to you within a matter of a day or two. You'll have that product. You could actually touch it, see it, smell it. And if you don't want it, you could also return it. So they bridge that gap for the other senses by providing you all that information online. Now, there's another key element to the success of your products online, and that is unless your product has a pretty strong brand, a brand recognition, or you have a lock on a digital marketing channel, there's a key element that you really have to succeed with your products online. And that element is what makes your product unique. So we strongly recommend to all of our SCORE clients to think hard about what their unique selling proposition or USP is. If you don't know what that unique selling proposition is, or if you cannot articulate it, then it's going to be very hard for you to be found online. The reason why that is because there is tremendous amount of information online and you'll simply be buried with the white noise that's out there. So for you to be able to show up on that first page of a search engine result, you have to successfully search engine optimize your content. And the best way to succeed is to have something that is unique, that will differentiate you from all the other products that are out there, so that you could emphasize that uniqueness and people will find you on the search engine when they search for that unique product. Even if you're doing advertising campaigns through pay-per-click, Google's pay-per-click, or for instance, Facebook ads, you still need to have that unique selling proposition in order to have an effective campaign that's going to return positive returns on your investment. Okay, so that is the product. The second P in the marketing mix is the price. Price is what the consumer pays, and price obviously is a number, so it's easy to digitize. However, there are different elements that you need to know about price that are important in the digital economy. For instance, if you're selling a commodity, nothing unique about your product, the price is going to be driven mainly by supply and demand. And if you are a small business, it's going to be very hard for you to compete against the larger businesses, which have the scale working for them as opposed to against them. So that's why it's very important for a small business, whatever they sell, that they have a unique selling proposition. And when you do, then what you have to figure out is what is that unique value that you're offering, and what that value is worth in dollars compared to the competing products that are out there in the industry. So that's one element. Another element is figuring out how to create a tiered price approach to your product or service. That could be based on either volume, on bundling different products or services together, or adding more options as you increase the price, for instance, on your service or product offering. For instance, if you look at the Zoom offering, the Zoom webinars, right? They have the freemium version, which everybody can use for free. You could use Zoom for up to 45 minutes if you like, without having to pay a penny. And then they have the upgraded version, which will enable you to have more than 2 people, for instance, join you in that meeting. And then you have the enterprise version, so on and so forth. So the more options you purchase, the higher the price becomes. If you look at Amazon, for instance, sometimes they help you or they recommend that you bundle certain products and you save some money by bundling. And obviously, when you buy higher volumes, sometimes you get volume discounts. So these are the strategies you have to consider when you're selling online with regards to your price. Another element you have to think about is the shipping element. Many of us who are Amazon shoppers with Amazon Prime have been spoiled to receive product with zero shipping costs that get to our door within a matter of a day or two. And also, if you want to return these products, we don't have to pay for the return shipping. This is an element that you have to think about with regard to your price. You either have to factor in the shipping and return shipping pricing and factor it into the pricing of your product, or it's going to have to be tagged on top. But that's an element that you have to think about in terms of what you're selling, what your competition is selling, what's out there, and make a decision regarding that factor here. Lastly, you want to minimize the friction that a prospective client will have to purchase your product online by offering as many payment options as possible to that prospective buyer. So you would see on most websites, major credit cards are usually accepted. They would accept PayPal, Apple Pay may be an option for iPhones or mobile devices, and Square may be another option. There are many options, but the more options that you offer, the less friction will be for the purchaser to purchase your product online. So that's the price P. Now we move on to the channels, and that's the third P in the marketing mix is place. Place is the location where the product or your service is marketed and sold. And traditionally, and many of you have your physical locations, your stores, that's the brick and mortar location. That's traditionally what's been available out there. What we're telling our SCORE clients is think in terms of what else you could offer in order to hedge your risks in the case of a pandemic like the one we're experiencing right now, or potentially the reoccurrence of potentially another wave of the virus that may come in that may require further or longer term closures. And the way you hedge it is by thinking in terms of creating additional locations or channels, and that's the digital or virtual channels. And we have multiple options digitally. You could sell your product through your website. You could sell them through social media. You could use simple as a phone or text. And those are digital means where you could present your products to your target customers and sell your products like that. Email is a good, effective, and efficient way of promoting and selling your products. Or if you don't want to invest in all these marketing tools, what you could do is pay somebody to do it for you. So you could have your products being sold on online resellers such as Amazon, eBay, Etsy, and there are many others as well. So think about hedging your bets. If you're just right now operating out of a physical location and you feel like you're struggling and you need other options, the digital realm may be an option for you as well. But how do you do that? How do you sell your product digitally? Well, what you need to do is create a digital marketing engine. And you create a digital marketing engine by first identifying and deciding on which channels you're going to promote and sell your products through. And here we have a webinar workshop actually that we give at SCORE that talks about all these digital channels in great detail and how to leverage each one of them, such as, for instance, online searches, which is also called organic search, or direct traffic that people come to you directly, either to your social media pages or your website by entering in your URL or domain name. Referral here, it refers to citations and links that are coming from other websites to your websites. Social are the social media platforms that are available, such as Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Email, these are the email blasts that go out, like the newsletters that we send out for you to be able to know about our workshops and webinars and register. That typically drives traffic straight to the website and creates conversions in business. And then obviously paid searches, those are the paid ads that we could purchase either through pay-per-click or Google My Business or Facebook ads or LinkedIn ads or Twitter ads. There are a lot of options available out there in cyberspace for you to be able to promote and advertise your product. So first you have to decide on the channels, and all these channels, basically their role is to create traffic and direct it to your website. Okay, once the traffic is in your website, You want to create a process that will convert that traffic into leads by capturing the information about your target clients, and then nurture these leads so you could convert it into an actual sale or turn these leads into customers. So you got to work on these processes so that traffic that comes to your website is actually capitalized on. And then the last item that you have to think about, and again here in the digital world, what's really convenient is that everything is in zeros and ones and bits and bytes, and they could be stored, they could be tracked, they could be analyzed, and based on all these metrics, you could make some key decisions that could significantly impact your key performance indicators. So what's very important here is that you plug into, for instance, the Google Analytics tools or Search Console or any other analytic tools so that you could make educated decisions as to which channels are creating the most revenue for you, or they're the more profitable for you, so you could scale these channels. And in the digital world, as I'll show you in a few minutes, there's tremendous opportunity for scale. The last P of the marketing mix is promotions, and that's advertising. And you could do that through all these digital channels that we talked about. But traditionally, people have been using for instance, snail mail approach, advertising on TVs, which by the way now has turned digital, and you could do that on YouTube right now if you like as well. Radio has turned digital, you could advertise digitally as well. Print media, billboards, some of them are turning digital with the high luminance LCD screens that you see right now on the roads. Trade shows are turning digital with virtual trade shows, same thing with flea markets. And word of mouth, which is always extremely important, but a lot of that word of mouth is actually now moving online on social media and such platforms. The more modern channels for promoting your product are the cyberspace channels. And as a matter of fact, as of last year, the total spending in promoting products in cyberspace has exceeded the spending of the more traditional ways of doing promotions in the past. So everybody has waken up to the benefits of promoting products online. And if you're not taking advantage of these benefits, then you're falling behind everybody else, possibly your competition. What are some of these options? There's a whole slew of them. I'm listing here a few of them: websites, email, social media, Google My Business, online media, virtual trade shows, webinars. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's tremendous opportunities in cyberspace for you to be able to promote your product. Now, what is important and what is essential for you to be able to do that promotion online? And we think that you need to have a digital foundation, and that digital foundation cannot happen without having a functional 2.0 website. And what I mean by a 2.0 website, traditionally, a website used to be just a one-way street, one-way communication between the vendor and the customer. So the vendor pretty much communicates to the customer all the customer needed to hear, and that was about it. With a 2.0 website, that communication became two-way. So now the customer could connect back with the vendor and provide more information and more details and potentially more input on their experience. In order to get a functional 2.0 website, our recommendation is that you use a content management system, such as WordPress, for instance, which is very popular with small businesses, and rely on some of the modern themes and some of the newer plugins. Those are the apps that you could plug into your WordPress site that will make it a lot more powerful. What you want to do is maintain your image and your brand with your website as with your brick and mortar locations. But also what you want to do is you want to use a platform that facilitates the display of your content on all devices, particularly mobile, because a lot of people right now are accessing all that information through their mobile devices and tablets, as well as their desktops, obviously. Another very important element is search engine optimization. We have a digital marketing workshop, again, that specifically talks about search engine optimization and how you do it on your website. Also, what you want to do is instill trust in your content. And that's the most important element, because without trust, people are not going to buy from you. So you need to be able to provide on your website, your social media sites, testimonials, success stories, survey results, reviews are very important, and many other items. The more you could establish out there that will help your target market gain trust about you, your operation, your product, your service, the better off you are digitally, because there is no more that physical face-to-face contact that you see in a brick and mortar type of activity. Very importantly, you want to create flows in your website that will lead the traffic from wherever they land on your landing pages to the forms that will convert them to leads. And that's what we call lead magnets. So your forms should not simply say, subscribe here to get my newsletter. People are just not interested in getting another email. You should have some really important information for them to want to give you their email address, or maybe a freebie that you could offer that they'd be willing to give you their name, email address, maybe their telephone number as well in order to receive it. And then last item obviously is to measure and track everything. Just like what we discussed, metrics are extremely important because they impact your key performance indicators and they will help you figure out what you need to do. One note I want to make here is that your web presence cost is a lot lower than brick and mortar costs. So do not skimp on building a functional and effective website. It's still going to be a lot cheaper than leasing a store or opening another location for you. I know there are a lot of tools out there that could help you create your website for free, but there are a lot of limitations for these tools. It does pay to have somebody build a functional website for you that knows what they're doing, particularly if you're going to rely significantly now and in the future on these digital channels. In addition to a website, you have to think about social media. Pretty much everybody is on social media today. And many of us obviously are familiar with Facebook. I mean, it's the largest platform for social media available out there with their own companies, Instagram and Messenger. They garner about 75% of the social media ad market. The total users in the United States exceed 190 million. So it's the majority of the people in the United States are on Facebook. The advertising that takes place on Facebook is typically business to consumer, but you see also business to business. Some of the advertising that we did to draw audience today, we did on social media, we did on Facebook. We targeted small businesses, so you could do targeting of businesses as well on Facebook. It's pretty inexpensive platform to advertise on if you could figure out exactly who your target market is. And we'll go over that in the next couple of slides. Another platform is LinkedIn. It's a professional social media platform. It has about 156 million professionals in the United States on LinkedIn. This is typically a business-to-business platform for advertising and for promoting your products and services. The costs of advertising on LinkedIn are much more expensive, around 10 times more than Facebook. But the higher average sale that you typically get from a business justifies the return on investment and justifies the cost of the ad campaign. Another platform that's very popular is Twitter. There's about 48 million people in the United States that are using it. Twitter is more of a spontaneous, real-time interaction with microblogs. Many of you are familiar with Twitter, and they will also offer the ability to advertise your products and services there. If your products are more visually driven with images or videos, we recommend you take a close look at YouTube, Instagram, and Pinterest. They're very effective for the visual component. What I would like to point out here are the numbers, just the sheer volume of people that you can reach. So if you're looking at scaling, if you want to really reach to a lot more than the audience that maybe you have captured in your target market, these are great platforms to advertise on because they will give you the ability to scale quite big. So let's go through an example if we want to reach a certain target audience on social media. And here, what I'm going to do is define a target persona that us at SCORE are interested in order to potentially reach them and persuade them to volunteer, become volunteers, SCORE mentors, so that they could assist small businesses and have them learn from their experiences. So the target market that we're going to try to reach here is affluent women that currently own a small business or are self-employed, who are interested in volunteering to help entrepreneurs and small business owners in the Sarasota or Manatee counties. And Spanish fluency is a plus because we do have SCORE clients that are Spanish speaking. Okay, so if this is the target market that our chapter at Minnesota here would like to reach, we need to digitalize that description here in a social media platform. And we're choosing here Facebook because of its sheer volume and because it's kind of the 600-pound gorilla in the industry. And when we target people in Facebook, we could also target people in Instagram and Messenger simultaneously. So to build a profile of this target market, first I have to define the demographics in Facebook. And Facebook gives me a lot of options in defining these demographics that you see coming up here, such as age, language, gender, location, so on and so forth. And they give you a tool where you could go in, you could start specifying, you want people that live in a certain location here, Manatee and Sarasota, with a 25-mile radius. I want to target people in the age of 27 to 64. The gender is women only. And the languages of interest are English and Spanish. So that's great. I've defined my basic demographic in basically just one screen in Facebook. Next, what I want to do is define some of the behavior of this target market. And again, here, Facebook gives me a lot of options. My interest here is to go after the business to business. So I want to go after small business owners because they bring in the expertise that we seek that could help our SCORE clients. And also what I'm going to set up as a behavior is Hispanic US bilingual, okay? Now, these are the two behaviors that I have set here, which is going to limit the size of the audience that I'm going to target. Now, I'm going to set some interests, which is going to expand a little bit on that target audience. And again, Facebook gives me a slew of features and interests that I could specify. And if I go in and I start searching for interest specific to what would SCORE mentor may need to have, for instance, people that have commented or liked Entrepreneur magazine posts. Same thing for Inc. magazine. Those are typically related to small businesses. People that have commented or liked female entrepreneur posts, lean startup company, entrepreneurship. So I specify as much as I can in order to define that target market that I'm trying to go after here. In addition to interests, I could set up some live events, and there are many, again, that are available to me. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to exclude the people. This is an exclusion. I'm going to exclude the people that are away from hometown. So if they're traveling on business or vacation, I don't want to bother them with my ads. They'll see the ad after they come back if that ad is still running. Also, Facebook tells you the size of that target market when you select it. So that's the worldwide number of people that are typically traveling or away from their location. Next, lifestyle and financials, because we're seeking affluent people that could afford to volunteer a significant amount of their time. I'm going to choose the household income of 25% or higher. So that defines the zip codes of which I'm going to be able to target. Okay, having done that, Facebook will create what I call is a digital target market for me here. The definitions that I just entered are created here. And also what it does is it tells me the size of my target audience. In this case, out of the 700,000 or 800,000 people that live in Manatee and Sarasota, we're going to be targeting 53,000 ladies. Now, if I wanted just to target Latinas, because I'm limiting my target campaign to just acquiring people that speak the Spanish language, all I have to do is modify here the Hispanic criteria to be a must also match. So instead of an or, it will be an and. And therefore, what that does is limits my campaign only to audience that is bilingual and Hispanic bilingual. Notice here that now my target audience is fewer than 1,000 people. Okay, going back to the initial female target, now all I have to do is just come up with a post on Facebook. It could be an article, it could be a promotion, it could be a video. Put that post on Facebook, set up a budget, and start the campaign. It's as simply as that. And all these 53,000 people will start being exposed to that post that I just posted. Now, if you're not scored, obviously you're not scored. What are you going to do on your side? Well, what you're supposed to do is create a post that engages your users and kind of entice them to click on it, visit your website, and then convert these people to leads. And the way you do that is if you tell them, come to my website and get a 50% coupon. If you have a retail store or a boutique, this is a one-time purchase, for instance, where you get 50% discount. What you've done is you've just acquired a lead from social media where you captured that information about that lead, whether it is their name, their email address, telephone number. And with that lead, you could start creating a database of leads that you could nurture in the long term. That's how you segment your target markets. That's how you digitalize them. And that's how you use promotion to drive traffic from social media to your website. Now, once you've captured that lead, how do you digitalize the lead nurturing? So it's not just enough to get a lead. You want to nurture that lead. You want to grow it from potentially being a cold lead to becoming a customer. And you do that online with emails, with texts, with webinars, with virtual trade shows, all the different options that we mentioned earlier. So you got the lead. First thing you have to do is identify where that lead came from. Why is that important? If you know where it comes from, then you could start creating metrics and trying to identify if the return on investment is worthwhile for a certain channel and pour more money in that channel if it is. Once you also get that lead, you want to enter it in your client relationship management, customer relationship management tool, such as Salesforce or Dynamics or HubSpot. The reason why you want to put it there is because you don't want any of those leads to fall through the cracks and forget about them. By putting it in that database, you will forever have that information, and then you could track that information and you could keep notes about all the dynamics that happens around that lead that you just received. Additionally, what I highly recommend is that you try to collect as much information about that lead as you can, whether it is the full name, their email address, their gender, their home address, telephone number, any interests that you could get. You'll be surprised how much information you could get about individual by doing a search on them in Google or LinkedIn. Why is it important that you get all that information? Because the more information you have, the better you are at segmenting those leads into the personas that you want to target. And how do you target those personas? You want to target each persona with a customized email template specific for that persona, and potentially also a customized call to action. By making your emails specific to each persona, you're creating a lot more value to that persona with your emails. So they'll be more interested in reading and following you by email. Also, what you want to do is build nurturing campaigns and workflows. That's what we call drip campaigns. So when somebody becomes a lead, you want to first notify them, for instance, that you're welcoming them as a lead. Maybe a few days later, you send them out a reminder to make sure that they did use, for instance, that 50% coupon that they downloaded. A few days later, maybe you may want to invite them to an event that you're having. A few days later, you may want to offer them another promotion. That's what a nurturing workflow or a drip campaign is, where every certain period of time, they will get exposed to some kind of promotion some kind of a value that you're trying to offer them so that you stay in their sight. As you know, out of sight is out of mind. You want to stay in their sight so that they know about you and then they purchase from you when there is a need. Also, you want to maintain a marketing calendar with all the important events. We just observed Memorial Day. Maybe there's a certain promotion that you do on Memorial Day. Father's Day is coming up soon. You got obviously the important ones in the digital space are Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So you may want to do specialized campaigns based on the calendar that you have. You do want to touch leads periodically, but you don't want to touch them too often to annoy them. And sometimes when you annoy them, what that does is they opt out, and you have to honor these opt-outs when they happen. The way you avoid or minimize these opt-outs is by always offering value with your email. Always offer value. So gauge the sending of your email based on the value that you're going to be providing those people with that email. One thing to note is that once you set up your lead nurturing workflows, they're up there and they're running 24/7 and they cost you virtually nothing. I mean, it's just automated process that will work for you. Whether you're open or shut down, it will continuously work for you, which is great. All right, so we've got the leads, we've nurtured them, we've got the leads to the point where they're warm enough so that they could potentially become clients. If your product does require human interaction to close the business, to get that lead to convert to a customer, you may want to consider leveraging your existing sales force as an inside sales, or potentially just move it completely inside or create inside sales to complement your outside sales force as well. And what's important for inside sales is to have a pretty strong and streamlined and efficient sales process. And you as the business owner have to create that process. So that's basically the steps that a salesperson has to do to walk a lead to get it from being either a cold or warm lead to becoming a customer. That's the sales process. You have to define that very well, and you have to define in that process all the tools that are needed in order to accomplish this process. So are you going to need a computer? Are you going to need a smartphone, email account? Are you going to need the customer relationship management tool? All the tools that are needed, you're going to have to make sure that they are supplied to your sales guys, and you have to train them on how to use them and how to apply that process. You want to monitor your sales pipeline constantly in the CRM tool. That's the customer relationship management tool. And when you monitor that pipeline, you don't want to just monitor the total results. You want to monitor individual salespeople results so that you could identify the people that may need a little more motivation or support or encouragement. And this way you could tell who your underachievers and overachievers are and compensate them properly. If you have a robust in-house or inside sale process, it could potentially completely replace your outside sales or complement. Now, we all know also that the sale is not the end of the sales process. There is customer experience involved. And what you want to do, particularly when you're working digitally, is be diligent about making sure that you're building customer intimacy. It's very easy to lose your audience online because of the lack of the physical face-to-face contact. And the way you do that is with different tools. One of them is online surveys. And as you exit this webinar, you will be prompted with a page in your browser that will ask you to complete a 10-question survey. This is done in SurveyMonkey. It is pretty easy to set up, pretty easy to use, pretty easy to complete, and you'll have a wealth of information that you could get from your customers. You could ask them to complete these surveys after the purchase, for instance, or on a periodic basis. But what you want to do is keep your finger on the pulse of your customer, and a survey is one way of doing that. Another great way of doing that is having them post reviews for you, either on Google My Business, Facebook, or Yelp. And you want to monitor these reviews, and you want to respond to them to show that you are actively interested in making sure that they are satisfied with the service and the product that you are offering. And this is Also important to do on social media. You'll see a lot of social media platforms giving the users the ability to post reviews. But you could also monitor different metrics. You could find out how many followers, how many likes you have, how many times people share your post. That's an indication of how engaged your users are. If you have a newsletter, your newsletter subscribers number and the opt-outs and the click-throughs will give you an indication of how engaged your users are. Use these metrics, again, to keep your finger on the pulse of your customer. And then online conferencing, make sure that you use it when needed. Zoom is almost free. There are many other tools like WebEx and GoToMeeting that you could use as well. It's important once in a while that you have a face-to-face. If you can't have it physically with your customer, at least try to have it virtually. The idea here is that you want to maximize the social proof, because clients online right now want to make sure that you are proving your ability, that you are satisfying your client base. And many of us go through to see what kind of reviews people are posting about your business. What are people saying on social media about you and your business? So it's very important that you have a pretty solid image in terms of your social proof online. There are many benefits to digital transformation. We hit here on the marketing and sales aspects of it, but I think in a COVID-19 time, it facilitates the remote operations, okay? So you could basically keep your business operational even though you cannot be at your physical location, your store. It does create barriers to entry, particularly if your competition is not yet digitally transformed. It does improve work efficiency, and it does that by eliminating routine work and automating a lot of the processes. It prolongs your company's lifespan because it does give you different channels in which you could operate and sell your product. And the bottom line is that your profitability is going to increase over time. And there are many benefits to increase profitability. Some of them are listed here. A note that I want to make that's very important is that you don't just want to think about the destructive force that COVID-19 in order to force you to digitally transform your business. This has been an evolutionary process for many businesses. It's been going on for 20 plus years. So think about the opportunities that digital transformation could bring to your business, not just during COVID-19, but beyond COVID-19. For those of you who think that small businesses are at a disadvantage to larger businesses while performing a digital transformation, McKinsey, who did this analysis in 2018, ran another analysis, and they found out that actually smaller businesses are 2.7 times more likely to succeed with their digital transformation than companies who have 50,000 or more employees. And the main reason is because of the size and the agility of the company. It's a lot easier for a smaller company to make changes and adapt and transform than it is for a larger company. Now, if you look at this study that took place in 2015, also by McKinsey, which is still valid today, if you look at it, it may look a little complicated, but in reality, it isn't. The green shades indicate a strong digital transformation. The red shades indicate lack of digital transformation. Anything in between is kind of the gray area in between. And what I'd like to draw your attention to here on the left are the industry sectors. And as you could see, the top industry sectors listed here: information and communication technology, media, professional services, finance and insurance, wholesale. Those industries are highly transformed. They are very much into the digital transformation. They're already transformed. And it is no secret that those industries have survived COVID-19 pretty well. And the reason why that is the case, because they could operate remotely. They did not need to be in physical locations. So the social distancing that was imposed on our society did not impact their business significantly. However, on the other hand, if you look at the sectors that are on the lower end here, you look at hospitality, like restaurants and hotels. You look at personal and local services, like hairdressers and massage parlors and nail salons. You look at entertainment, like movie theaters, recreation, right? Gyms and other places, mini golf, for instance. Look at retail, trade, the boutique stores. Those businesses have suffered significantly during this pandemic because they were asked to shut down. And another way to look at it, lack of their ability to operate in cyberspace during this period severely impacted their ability to continue their business. So this is something to walk away with that I hope you'll look at, see what industries you fall in, try to see how you match up compared to your competition. They divide them down to 3 groups here. Assets, those are your assets. You could have digital as well as physical assets. These are the processes, that's your value chain and how you operate your business. And this is your labor, basically what's going to take to operate those processes. Is your labor automated or semi-automated, or is it all manual? These are the kind of things that you have to look at, and look at the opportunities that Mackenzie highlighted in all these different boxes here, where they identified opportunities where people can improve and sectors can improve their digital transformation. So look at that as an opportunity for your business to look into in order to accelerate or move into the digital transformation realm. Last slide, and thank you for bearing with me, the digital tools. We're not going to leave you here with just theory. There's a lot of tools that are available that help you perform that digital transformation. These are very mature tools. They've been used for many years, some of them for 10, 20 years even. And they're proven to work. We understand that you may not have the expertise to operate all these tools on your own. Call your SCORE mentors, ask them for guidance in terms of creating a strategy in your digital transformation. If they can't help you, they could pull in mentors that may be able to co-mentor with you. And we will also connect you with experts that are local here that could help you implement some of these solutions in your business in order to help you digital transform. With that, we have one more poll. Janae, if you don't mind running that, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. And if you don't mind taking just a minute to answer, I know it's getting late here. If at all possible, we have a few questions here that will give us a little indication as to your preparedness in terms of digital transformation, and if you think this is something you're interested in pursuing in the near or long-term future.
Hi, Nabila. While they're filling out the survey, there's 2 questions for you. Do you want me to ask those now?
Yeah, let's give them like 30 seconds. I think we got that. Is there a lot of questions that came in?
We have, I think, a little over 18, but there's 2 for your section of the webinar.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, why don't you go ahead and start with those questions, and then we'll address
Okay.
it.
Well, one was regarding the SCORE mentor demographics example. Was that built using Facebook, or what was used?
Correct. So it's the Facebook ad manager that was used, which will apply for either boosting your posts or creating more sophisticated ads, or even creating ads for Instagram, because it's under the same umbrella, same company, Instagram and Messenger as well.
Okay, and then do you have any suggestions for apps or software that monitor ratings and many different platforms at the same time, like Google, TripAdvisor, Yelp, Messenger, all in one place with the ability to respond from and to be notified?
Okay, to monitor ratings, actually there are tools out there. It's not coming to my mind right now, but Ken, I see you asked that question. I'll make sure to, Optima is one of them that comes to mind right now, but I'll make sure to follow through and I'll get you a list of them. I don't just want to give you one. I'll give you a list of them that you can monitor these reviews with.
Okay, those are all of the questions for the digital marketing portion.
Okay, excellent. If any other questions come in, I'm going to stick around. I'll participate with the other questions and answers as well. So if others come in, I'll be more than glad to answer them.
So Tom, do you want to conclude with the slide and then we can go to the Q&A?
Sure. So this brings us to the end of the formal presentation. And I just want to just point out one other piece about our local score chapter here. As you can see on this slide, we list our sponsors, which are mostly local community banks. Each one of those on there are indeed PPP approved banks. So if you're in that bucket where you haven't applied for a loan yet, you could call on any of these. You may want to even mention that you are, hopefully you're a Minnesota Score client and you have a mentor. These local banks are very familiar with Score. They are as sponsors, they make small donations to help us in small expenses, and they'd probably be more than happy to help you through. What we have found on the PPP program is that the smaller community banks are much more helpful than the larger banks, simply because they have more of a personalized approach to their business. So feel free to call on any of these sponsors. So with that, we'll begin the, I think we're ready to start the Q&A session. If I'm not mistaken.
I'll first end the polling, if that's all right with Nabil.
Yes, go ahead, please, Jenny. Thank you.
Wow, look at that. Fundamentally change our industry. Wow, that's big time.
The one I may make one comment on here. I noticed that we have 33% say digital business may require us to refresh our current strategy. You may want to call upon your SCORE mentor to help you think through that strategy as it relates to the business model canvas. That's why we have that process in place. Your mentor, if they're not familiar with all of the tools that Nabil presented in his presentation, well, we can always reach out to Nabil and have him walk. Your mentor will probably do a co-mentorship and with the assistance of some advice from Nabil. Nabil, if you haven't noticed, is our subject matter expert on digitizing a business when it relates to sales, marketing, and tracking your customers and all of your efforts. So we are very fortunate to have him here.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, so now we can start the Q&A, I believe. The first question we had was, we received the PPP loan in which the 8 weeks ends June 7th. We also received on April 30th an EIDL grant of $10K. Will we be able to use the grant money to pay payroll for periods after June 7th, or will the grant automatically be applied to our PPP loan forgiveness?
Let me take the second part. On the calculation form, when you go look at it, you'll see that they ask you for the amount of your grant. And the amount of the grant that you have, which was a $10,000, will be subtracted from your PPP loan forgiveness. You will owe $10,000. Now, with regards to using the money after June 7th, that's a question, because your period ends June 7th. The question would be, have you spent all of the loan by June 7th, the 56 days? So I don't know if there's a way to ask the questioner to respond to that part of it, because that would be helpful to understand.
Yeah, I could add here, Barry. The applicant can specify the 8 weeks in which they decide to pay the payroll with. based on this forgiveness application that you just went through. So the company has to calculate how much of that payroll has been paid during this 8-week period and decide what that period is and define it in the application for forgiveness. Just be careful. Don't spend the additional $10,000 that you got for your EIDL grant if you don't want to have to repay it afterwards out of your own pocket, because that's going to be subtracted from the forgivable amount that you're submitting for PPP. So.
Right.
Yeah. So if you want to pay your staff, go ahead and pay the money from the PPP. Don't touch the EIDL grant, and pay it back to the bank that loaned you the PPP loan.
One thing to add to that, when you read the application regarding the period of time to be measured, there's what's called the covered period, and then there's something called the alternative period.
Right.
And it's based on when your payroll was. So my suggestion to the person asking the question is to go back and look at the payroll periods and to have them link up with either the definition of a covered period or alternatively the other period. What's next?
One other addition to that too, Barry, we may want to mention, as we mentioned, in that all of those dates and the dates on which you have to spend the money as for payroll, and all of those date requirements, the way that the money is used is all under consideration, and chances are pretty good that those are going to change. And as Barry gave you the advice, you don't have to put in your application till October 31st. So it may pay to wait a little bit and see if the rules change a little bit too.
Oh, Tom, that's exactly right. You know, the 56 days, whenever you start or stop, is one thing. But if indeed Congress enacts a new set of rules that says, okay, you can have 10 weeks or 12 weeks to spend the money, then there's your answer. But I would also repeat what Nabil said about the $10,000 grant. You don't want to use that and then have it deducted from your forgiveness.
Yeah.
Okay, Janae, let's go to the next one.
Okay, this attendee asked if you are required to reduce the compensation.
I'm not sure what they mean by that.
Yeah. Let me provide some input, and then maybe that person can clarify more the question. You're not required to reduce the compensation. As a matter of fact, if you reduce the compensation of your employees, you are less likely to have the full PPP loan forgiven. So if you've paid your employees less than what you've paid them last year for the 8 weeks time, it is unlikely that you're going to get the 100% of the PPP loan forgiven. So there is no requirement either way, but we strongly recommend, if you want to get the full PPP loan forgiven, that you maintain the same payroll or more to your employees, or the same number of employees that you paid in the previous year.
I had to answer that question from one of my regular SCORE clients. And I have, thinking that the question may be asked over the webinar, I have a piece of paper I want to read from about the safe harbor. And what they say is there's a reduction in forgiveness, meaning you'll have to pay money if there is a reduction in wages for any employee over the 8-week period. Here's the important part: in excess of 25% of the total salary of the employee during the beginning of the year through the end of March. So rather than, I don't expect you to write that down, but when you go back into the application, my suggestion would be to look at that part again. Next.
Okay, this person asked or said, I use QuickBooks Payroll. Are QuickBooks Payroll reports enough to certify the reporting requirements?
Nabil, do you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah, they're actually perfect. Intuit keeps track of your payroll for you in excellent reports. This is what you're going to need to submit to your bank. If you have your 941s that you filed at the end of the quarter, so in July, if you have the 941 for Q2, make sure you submit that. Since the forgiveness application has to be filed before end of October, you may not have the third quarter 941, so you need to submit the weekly or biweekly or monthly payroll reports that Intuit will generate for you for you and your employees, basically. Definitely rely on these reports. They are ideal.
All right, and the next question is, will there be another round of PPP checks?
From whose lips to God's ears, right? The thing is that the HEROES Act that's being put together in the House is $3 trillion, and I believe there is potentially more funding there, but unless Tom and Nabil disagree, we don't have any definitive answer to that question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's correct, Barry, at this point.
Yeah, and the fact that there's 100 billion left in the funds still to be dispersed, I don't think Congress is very motivated at this point to go ahead and issue more funds for PPP. Unless we go through another major shutdown where businesses are forced to close again for an extended period of time, I don't foresee that happening again.
All right, what if your lender refuses to discuss the loan with you? My bank refused to take any and all questions regarding the PPP loan.
So Tom, you're the guy who really has the contacts and knows about the bankers. How would you start that one off trying to answer the question?
Sure. If it's one of the sponsor banks that you see on that final slide, we know, or I know, people at each of those banks that we could call to discuss.
And by the way, we hope
it's not one of them because they're good. We found them to be very helpful. But that goes. What I may suggest is, and I'm assuming that you've already, if you go in and you talk to one of the local lending officers in one of these community banks, obviously, if that person can't help you, you'd certainly want to try to elevate it to the manager. And if that ends up being a dead end, then I would suggest that you try the 800 numbers that we have on here. There may be some counseling in the from the SBA would be an option to ask about the status of your loan. Otherwise, I'd turn to your mentor. Make sure you get a SCORE mentor. Ask them for advice. They maybe could assist you. And the other option is my guess is we've had this question from some of the larger banks, the Wells Fargos, the Chase. Some of the larger banks tend to have more of a hands-off approach to these loans. And if that's the case, then you're kind of at your wit's end, and I'd turn to your mentor and ask them to help you through the loan application and perhaps even view these webinars again, and perhaps the question will be answered somewhere in there.
Yeah, Tom, I'd like to.
So those are ideas.
I'd like to add a couple of notes here, if okay. It's not clear whether that person did get their loan or not. If they have not gotten the loan, there's still time, there's still funds. Go back and visit our workshop from the previous two, from April, end of April, and in March. It will walk you through the steps. We give you also an extensive list of banks and of financial technology companies, fintechs, that you could contact in order to pursue getting that loan from them. So that's one thing. On the other hand, if you've already received the loan and your banker is still not talking to you about your loan, my bank told me that the sale has shipped, PPP sale, the ship has sailed, but they are still constructing the ship as it sails. So they don't have all the information yet that they are going to need in order to answer all our questions. Luckily, we have time for the loan forgiveness application to be submitted until end of October. So hopefully by that time, either your bank will be more responsive or there will be a lot more assets online, such as on YouTube, that will guide you through that process so you can submit the application correctly.
Right. I'd like to add one last thing on this topic. Last Friday night, the 23rd, the SBA issued what are called guidance and instructions to lenders. I just happened to come across it and I have it in my files because I was curious about how lenders would react to all the paperwork that's coming down the road. I read parts of it, and my comment to the person who asked that question is, again, if you have a PPP loan and your bank or your lender hasn't been that cooperative, it may have been that they did not have these new sets of guidance that just came out last Friday. I am not defending any bank or lender who doesn't, any bank or lender who doesn't talk to a borrower. I mean, that's unspeakable, but I would try to recontact that bank that wasn't responsive and find out if they're more responsive now. Why don't we go to the next one?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Would it make sense to pay all employees a bonus before the 56 days are up in order to ensure I paid enough for forgiveness?
Yes.
That certainly would be a reasonably good use of the funds.
Absolutely.
As I read that question too, Barry, I'm kind of wondering if the person isn't sure that they've maintained, once again, back to that first question where, you need to be paying people their normal payroll amount that you indicated in your application for the period before the crisis occurred. Now, if you haven't been, then certainly paying a bonus to get you to that level to meet that requirement would be a must.
Yes, and if I may add, if you have salespeople whose commissions have been impacted severely during this crisis, it's just not fair that they're not getting their commission checks. So make sure you make them whole. So if you did get the PPP, which is based on last year's income, make sure you pay these sales guys their commissions, even if they have not brought their sales.
I would just harken back to the part of my presentation. I'm just looking up the slides here. The part about instructions on pages 7 and 8. It's not straightforward. And when I talk to accountants and a few other people about how to do this stuff, they keep turning me to that Schedule A worksheet and the instructions about loan forgiveness. So I know we can't provide you with a clear, distinct answer that you can take to the bank, pardon the pun, but the fact is that I go back and read those instructions and look at the worksheet, Schedule A worksheet again to see. Are we doing okay on time, by the way?
Yes.
Still got 20 minutes, but we'll stay as long as we need to. As long we still have 34 people on. So.
Okay. What's the next question then?
Next one, Janae.
All right. How long do you need to keep records on the PPP loan? I heard 10 years and a lower number of years in the presentation.
Yeah, I can take that. I'll be honest with you. In the early days, it may have been 10 years. I don't remember. But this new guidance that I mentioned that came out Friday night on May 23rd clearly says that the documentation must be kept for 6 years.